Hotel workers? What's the craziest, weirdest thing you've discovered in a guest room? Male story 1. I remember the first time I heard this story. We were all gathered around at one of those backyard barbecues, the kind where everyone has their fill of cheap beer and the conversation gets louder as the night drags on. My buddy Steve decides to bring up his dad's infamous tale, the one that never gets old, no matter how many times he shares it. Steve's old man owns a handful of hotels, all small to mid-sized places, nothing fancy, but he's got some stories, let me tell you. So here's how it went down according to Steve. At one of his dad's hotels, there's this hard rule. If you wet the bed, whether it's from too many late-night drinks or some lack of control, they tack on PS50 to your bill. It's to cover the cost of new sheets and the effort of the housekeeping crew scrubbing that mattress like it's an exorcism. Fair enough, right? Well, not everyone thinks so. One time, a couple stayed over. They seemed like the average type. Nothing that would make you take a second look if you passed them in the lobby. Check-in was smooth, no fuss. The next morning, the maid goes to flip the room and finds the bed absolutely drenched. We're talking soaked through. She does her job, keeps her head down, and passes the note up the chain. Steve's dad adds the usual PS50 to the bill like clockwork. When the woman comes to check out, she notices the charge. She's not shy about making a scene. She's adamant it wasn't pee. But here's the thing. She won't say what it was, just that it wasn't what they thought. Now, Steve's dad doesn't suffer fools. He walks up, folds his arms, and gives her that no-nonsense stare he reserves for these types of situations. All right, if it's not piss, then what is it? The woman is red-faced, clearly trying to decide if she's going to go through with what she's about to say. She leans in, like she's letting him in on some big secret, and just blurts it out. It's because my husband is amazing. I had the biggest happy ending of my life. Steve's dad, he's not a prude, let's put it that way, just bursts out laughing right there in front of everyone in the lobby. The lady's husband, who'd been standing a few paces behind her, suddenly looks real interested in the carpet pattern. The front desk staff, they're doing that thing where they're trying not to look, but they're all ears. After she leaves, Steve's dad goes back to his office, sits there for a minute, and then does what he always does when something like this happens. He makes a new rule. So, from that day forward, every guest checking in at his hotels is greeted with a sign that reads, clear as day, PF50 charge for bedwetting or for happy endings so intense they ruin our sheets. And honestly, Steve swears they've had to enforce it more than once since then. Male story 2. That evening felt like any other shift, right around dinner time when the lobby starts to buzz. I leaned against the front desk, half listening to the hum of the TV playing the news. When she came up to me, this spry woman in her 70s with the kind of energy that made you forget her age, she had a plate covered with foil, and before I could say a word, she plopped it in front of me, told me I was way too skinny to be catching anyone's eye. The food smelled fantastic. Some homemade casserole, buttery rolls, and I think a slice of pie. I didn't even hesitate. I dug in right there, letting that warmth spread through me as she stood there, grinning like I was her own grandkid. Her husband joined us not long after, this tall, quiet guy with kind eyes. He handed her a leash, and off she went to take their dog for a quick walk, while he stayed back and chatted. They were in town to visit an old friend, he said, someone they hadn't seen in years. The way he talked about his wife, you could tell he adored her, the kind of love you only read about. They headed up to their room together, him holding her close like they were still on their honeymoon. Boy, the night got quiet again. I was handling the usual requests for extra towels and more pillows when the phone rang, and I heard that tremble in his voice. He kept saying she wouldn't wake up. I sprinted to their room, my heart thudding in my chest. I had 911 on the line before I even reached their door. When I stepped inside, the TV was still going, some game show on low volume, and there she was, leaning against his shoulder. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, like she had just drifted off. He had his arm around her, shaking her gently, calling her name over and over. I could see it in his eyes, this disbelief, like if he'd just tried hard enough, he could wake her up. Paramedics showed up, but it was clear she had slipped away. He kept holding her hand while they confirmed what he already knew. I stayed with him after they left. He sat there on the edge of the bed, trying to reach his kids. No answer. The minutes stretched into hours. I kept him company in that dimly lit room, surrounded by the smell of her perfume and the half-eaten plate of dinner she never finished. Mail story 3. I remember the day I stumbled upon it. The guest, a wiry, middle-aged guy with greasy hair and thick-rimmed glasses, had checked out that morning, mumbling something about catching a train south. I didn't think much of it. He'd been the quiet sort, kept to himself. No fuss, no late-night noise. When I went to clean his room, though, that's when things got unpeculiar. The bed was still neatly made, like he'd barely slept in it, not a single wrinkle on the sheets. But on the corner of the dresser, there it was, a worn, weather-beaten notebook. The cover had this phrase scribbled in wobbly black ink: "Why I love salad." Honestly, I just laughed at first. I mean, who writes an entire notebook on salad? But curiosity got me, so I cracked it open. The first page, it hit like a fever dream. Salad is life, it started. Salad breathes, it evolves, it whispers secrets. Every page that followed was a jumble of scribbles, diagrams of lettuce leaves, obsessive rants on the texture of spinach. The guy had a thing for greens, that much was clear. But the deeper I flipped, the more it veered into some bizarre territory. There was this one page dedicated to praising the soul of cucumbers, as if they were some kind of divine entity. Another had an intricate drawing of what looked like a tomato, but with human eyes. Then it got weirder. In between praises of kale and arugula, he'd sketched what looked like tiny faces hidden among the leaves. Like salad was. Watching him, at this point my spine tingled with that sensation you get when you're being watched, except I was alone in that silent, sunlit room. My mind kept telling me it was just someone's unhinged obsession, but there was something about the frantic handwriting, the drawings that seemed to pulse with this manic energy, that made it hard to put the book down. Flipping through, I found one of the last entries, and it was dated only 2 weeks ago. The writing had grown shakier, nearly unreadable, like he'd been writing in a hurry, maybe hiding from something. "Salad knows," it read. "The crunch is its voice, the dressing hides its tears." Then, at the very bottom of the page, in letters so faint I almost missed it, "They are coming tonight. The lettuce warned me." I snapped the notebook shut, the room suddenly feeling too tight. The air around me felt charged, like static before a storm. I don't know what that guy was into, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I shoved the notebook in the lost and found box downstairs and made a mental note to bleach the room twice, just in case. No one ever came back for that notebook. Mail story 4. It was a Sunday afternoon, right after checkout. My feet were already aching from hours of lugging vacuum cleaners and garbage bags up and down the halls. I was hoping to finish up fast, grab some lunch, and maybe catch the game. But when I reached room 409, I knew something was off. The air in the hallway outside stank like an overused porta-potty baking in the sun. I cringed, but figured they'd just left some nasty takeout in the trash. I pushed the door open and it hit me like a brick to the face. The smell was thick, rancid, practically solid. I gagged, pulling my shirt over my nose, and stepped inside. The bedsheets were all over the place, pizza boxes and beer cans scattered everywhere. Looked like a frat party gone wrong. The guys who stayed there, a whole damn basketball team, had clearly taken "make yourself at home" way too literally. But it wasn't the mess in the room that made my stomach twist, it was the bathroom. The door was ajar, and I could see right away something had gone very, very wrong in there. The toilet, Jesus, it wasn't just clogged. It wasn't just dirty. It was full. And I'm not talking about a regular, oh, the plumbing's busted kind of full. These guys had somehow managed to pile crap so high it formed a literal mountain peaking above the rim. The thing looked like a goddamn volcanic island. I don't know how they did it. Seriously, the logistics were baffling. They must have climbed onto the sink or one leg on the tub to, pull off this kind of collective effort. No one flushed. Not once. They just kept adding to it, layer by layer, like some grotesque team-building exercise. The worst part? It wasn't solid. The top looked like it was starting to collapse under its own weight, with this slick, shiny surface threatening to spill over. There was no way a plunger or even a snake could handle that disaster. I backed out of there, dry heaving, eyes watering. I grabbed my phone, called maintenance, and told them they'd need more than a plumber, maybe a hazmat suit, hell, maybe an exorcist. I wasn't getting paid enough to deal with that biohazard. Story 5. There was that one winter when I worked room service at the hotel, smack between the hospital and the bus terminal. The place had this weird energy, like it didn't know whether it wanted to be a temporary pit stop for exhausted travelers or a waiting room for people about to get cut open. You'd get guests with suitcases wheeled in one hand and those pushing IV poles with the other. Sometimes you didn't know if you were dropping off a turkey sandwich to someone fresh off a red-eye flight or someone trying to calm their nerves before going under the knife in the morning. The deaths were the worst. First time it happened, I found out by accident. I was dropping off breakfast trays to the 3rd floor, and as I rounded the corner, I saw these two guys, stiff and silent, wheeling out a stretcher covered in a white sheet. The air was thick with that antiseptic smell hospitals have, not the usual coffee and bacon aroma. That's when the front desk whispered to me later that a guest hadn't made it through the night, and it happened more than once. Always with a nurse-like efficiency, quiet as a mouse. We were told to keep our mouths shut about it. It was like, okay, room 318 had their last checkout, and we'd all just nod and get back to it. But then there were the nights when things got weird in a completely different way. Adult shoots. I remember one night, right around 1 a.m., I got a call from room 427 asking for 4 carafes of coffee and 2 bottles of cheap red wine. Who drinks coffee and wine together at that hour, right? But I packed it all on the cart and took the elevator up. When the door opened, the smell hit first, like perfume, sweat, and something spicy like cinnamon, maybe. I stepped inside, and there it was. This whole setup, with lights, camera tripods, and a bed draped in scarlet sheets, a dude in nothing but a robe waved me in, and there were these 2 women adjusting their lingerie, like they were just putting on a pair of socks. No one even batted an eye at me. They were too busy fussing over the lighting and checking shots on a tiny screen. I put the tray on the dresser and tried to make my exit, but not before one of the girls reached over, grabbed a bottle, and just started chugging it. I swear, the way she downed that wine, you'd think it was apple juice. The guy in the robe gave me a nod, shoved a 50 in my hand, and shut the door behind me. Walking back to the service elevator, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed some bizarre mix of business meeting and bachelor party gone sideways. The hotel management didn't care as long as the bill was paid. Yeah, the hospital crowd and the adult shoots were 2 sides of a messed up coin. You had people dealing with death and desperation on one end of the hallway, and down the other, it was booze-fueled hedonism at 2 a.m. That hotel was like a magnet for weird. Male story 6. It was one of those brutally humid summer mornings, the kind where the air clings to your skin even inside the hotel lobby. I was on shift, barely awake, sipping my third cup of bad coffee, when I got a call from the front desk. They said room 212 had overstayed their checkout time, no response to calls, and the guest hadn't left a key. I groaned, grabbed my master key card, and trudged upstairs. The guy was lying face up on the bed, fully dressed, arms at his sides. I called his name a couple of times, hoping he'd just had one too many the night before, but he didn't flinch. I stepped closer, nudged his shoulder, and felt the chill radiating from his skin. His eyes stared at the ceiling, pupils glazed over, lips pulled tight like he'd seen something that stopped his heart cold. I knew he was gone. No question about it. I took a step back, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next, and that's when I noticed the brown bag on the table. At first, I thought it was just trash, maybe some takeout he'd forgotten, but it looked heavy, almost bulging at the seams. I opened it up and blinked. The bag was stuffed with crisp $100 bills, bound together in tight stacks. I've seen movies with bags of cash, but seeing that kind of money in real life, just sitting there in a dingy hotel room, felt unreal. I did a quick count, and it had to be at least 20 grand. For a second, the room seemed to hold its breath. I glanced back at the dead guy on the bed, his lifeless stare fixed on the ceiling, and then at the bag. Whatever had gone down here, I wanted no part of it. I backed out of the room, let the door click shut behind me, and headed straight to the front desk. Male story 7. The room stank the second I cracked open the door. A sharp, pungent odor hit my nose like a slap. I half expected to find spoiled food or a clogged toilet, but what I found instead made me step back so hard I nearly tripped. Cats. Everywhere. At least 10 of them, maybe more, darting around like furry little ghosts, slipping under the bed, behind the curtains, into the closet. Some were lounging on the pillows like they owned the place, one gnawing on what used to be a bedspread. The room looked like it had been hit by a hurricane. The litter box she'd left behind was overflowing, unused food cans scattered like confetti across the floor, and the noise? Constant meowing, claws skittering on the hardwood, the occasional hiss when one cat got too close to another. I hadn't even stepped all the way in when one of the bigger ones, a fat gray tabby, took a swipe at my ankle. I shook it off, grabbed the nearest trash can lid as a makeshift shield, and went deeper inside. The bed was a disaster. The sheets reeked of cat piss, and tufts of fur clung to every surface. There, on the nightstand, was a crumpled $100 bill pinned under a napkin scribbled with, "Thanks for taking care of these guys, be back in a week." No name, no contact info, just that. And she'd been gone at least a week already. Maintenance refused to go in. Can't blame them. Jose turned pale when he peeked through the doorway and caught sight of the mess, so it fell to me and Clara to deal with it. We called the local shelter, but they were packed, said the best they could do was send someone by in a couple of days, Meanwhile, the cats were shredding the place like they were auditioning for a horror movie. We had to improvise. I found a big roll of plastic tarp and duct taped it over the hallway entrance to keep them from escaping into the rest of the hotel. We started laying down trays of food to lure them into carriers we'd borrowed from guests, who were more than happy to help once they heard the commotion. It took us 3 hours, but eventually we managed to get every last furball into the lobby. The lady never came back. We kept the tip, split it with Clara, but that smell clung to room 308 for weeks. Nail story 8, I remember that guest like he was some kind of urban legend. He'd stroll in every week, never a minute late, always asking for the same room, 202. No smile, no small talk, just a swipe of the card, a nod, and he'd disappear down the hallway. It wasn't my job to care, really, but there's only so many times you see someone check in and out like clockwork before you start wondering what's up. The guy had a routine, sure, but it felt a little too precise, like he was ticking off some hidden checklist every time. One night, he left earlier than usual. Maybe he had somewhere more important to be, but it seemed off. The housekeeper, Maria, caught me at the desk afterward, eyebrows raised like she was about to spill the juiciest gossip. "You notice how he's never got bags? No luggage, nothing," she whispered, leaning in like the walls had ears. I shrugged it off, but I kept thinking about it. If a guy's renting a room that often, you expect him to at least carry a toothbrush. Curiosity got the best of us. Maria, the security guard, Tony, and I went to check out room 212 after he checked out that evening. Tony, this big guy, who usually acted all tough, had his hands trembling a little as he pushed open the door. The place looked untouched. Bed made, towels still folded. But then, Maria pointed at the bed frame. There was a weird bulge under the mattress. Tony lifted it up like he was expecting a rat to jump out. Instead, there it was, a blow-up doll, deflated like a sad balloon. We all stood there trying to process it. I'm not sure what I was expecting to find. Drugs, guns, something more illegal, but a blow-up doll? I let out a laugh that was probably louder than it needed to be. Maria just shook her head, muttering something in Spanish that I'm pretty sure meant men are pigs. Tony deflated the thing the rest of the way, shoved it into a trash bag, and took it out to the dumpster like he was tossing yesterday's leftovers. The next week, the guy showed up again, but he looked different, almost twitchy. He asked for his usual room, and when I handed him the key, I swear his eyes darted around like he was searching for some kind of sign. He left after that one night and never came back again. Room 202 stayed empty for weeks.